Well, hello everybody. Welcome back to the show. It feels like it's been 100 years, and it's been a while though, hasn't it? It's just amazing how time flies out on the out when you're out here playing with solar and everything. Hope everyone's doing good. It's good to see so many of you online tonight. How's everybody doing? Hopefully doing well. We've got a really awesome, we've got some subject matter that's really cool this week. We're going to talk about solar autonomy and what it means for you and how it works and what it is and why it's important. I figured with the winter solstice coming up here on the 21st, what is today, the 15th? So we got 6 days, and I brought my Mountain Dew in at the last minute here. So pardon me while I open it up so that I don't lose my voice. I was rushing around trying to get the my USB port went out tonight. I don't know what happened. It just stopped working. So I'm like plugging things into my computer left and right. And it appears to be all okay. So let me just make sure that make sure you can see my chats, and hopefully you can. And hope everybody else is doing good. And see who we got on the show tonight, and then we will see if we can get started. I don't have any news or anything like that. As you all know, I have been rushing, putting together the solar shed. I hope you've been watching the new solar shed series. The 48-volt system is fantastic. I got the 6000 XP hooked up out there. I've got the little 3000 Pikachu model coming up soon, and we've got tons of cool stuff coming up for it. Hooking up more panels and testing and all kinds of things. And I've got some really cool battery tests coming out here soon with some EcoWorthy sent me a couple of batteries that I wanted to get out to you guys. So it's just been this thing. And next month, I've got this really cool company that contacted me recently and wants me to test out some really cool electrical audit tools for your panels to kind of give you an idea. So I'll walk you through the full thing there and how we use electricity, how you can monitor each plug and see what's going on and everything like that. We did a little of this on the on the uh, on the RV, but we've never done it at a house style in an actual real size panel and everything. And I've worked with an application called Sense. I don't know if you've SENSE, I think it is, and it kind of senses the different what's on different plugs and stuff, and it's kind of cool. But it's only got two CT clamps, and then you plug it in for power, and it kind of learns as you go along the different signals or the different uses within the electricity, and kind of senses things like that. So it's kind of screwy, but it works, but it's not near as good as this one will be. So this ought to be a great thing to do. So let's talk a little bit about solar autonomy, and when it comes to autonomy in a solar system, and I'm talking about a very specific meaning of it. I'm talking about the number of days that your battery can power you alone without the assistance of solar power. It's a very explicit term, meaning that if you can power, let's say, and we can make a very simple case out of this. Let's just say that if you have a battery that has 10 kilowatts, and you run for 5 kilowatt hours a day, you're talking about 2 days of autonomy. And that's exactly what we're referring to today. How you get these calculations, what they mean, why they're important, and it allows you to kind of get an idea of how you should be thinking of them, or at least how I think you should be thinking of them. Obviously, there's tons of opinions on this, and no, you shouldn't be listening to all one person or all one thing, because what I may do is different than what some people may do. And also, financial restraints can sometimes depict on what you're capable of doing. This became apparent to me the other day as a subject matter because I was hooking up the new solar shed, and I thought, oh, this would be a great time. I'll plug in an air conditioner, and I plugged in the freezer and the soda machine and the food trailer, and I plugged into a new freezer in the solar shed, and I'm thinking, oh, I'll just plug in all this stuff. And then the next day, right after I hooked it all up, there was clouds. And then the day after that, it was cloudy again. And I'm watching the battery go down every day. And I'm thinking this is a really good subject matter to explain why autonomy is important for especially and the impact on different size systems, whether it is a grid tied system where you have the flexibility of a using the grid, whether it is completely off grid, or whether it's a hybrid system, and then how that system would respond in disasters and that type of thing. So that's when it becomes super important. So let's walk through some real practical cases in real world. And obviously, if you have questions, feel free to let me know what those are, and we will cover them also. But I'm going to go through really why. I'll start with why autonomy matters. And a lot of people think, well, I got a solar system and that's the end of it and it's all said and done. But we all know that autonomy matters because the number of days that you can operate without the sun, without full sun. Now, that doesn't mean there isn't some fudge factor here, and I can explain to you how, we'll get into exactly how you can use that fudge factor to your benefit and what that may mean. But the raw calculation is 2 days is based on what your full consumption is. Now, if your full consumption, let's say, and let's look at cloudy days, days when it's storming. A lot of you up north have snow days where the snow covers your panels, and if your panels are mounted in a high place where you can't get to them and brush them off, or it's just too damn cold outside, you don't want to go out and brush them off, you may run into it there. A lot of the forest fires and stuff where we had some smoke, we had some people saying how it impacted the solar performance because the air was smoky. It also, you have to consider where you live and and what I mean by that is when you're further up north, you obviously have shorter summers and shorter winter days, especially. If you're further to the west, like in Washington, you have a lot more rain days than you would where you're here in Florida, where I have lots of sunny days. Whereas opposed to if I was in, let's say Arizona, I may have, beautiful sun most of the time. So that's going to have some impact on your autonomy. This isn't an exact science. Now, you could make it an exact science by calculating what the averages are every year at that time. And NSB says, I didn't make any solar today. And I don't know, NSC, if I actually tested to see if I could bring that message up on the screen. Let me see if I can get that up on the screen. But I had the same problem. Didn't make any, well, I made a little bit of solar a little bit late in the afternoon. There was a small peak of it showing up there for a little while. Let's see, capture window. We want the pop out window. This one here, I think, is the one I want. And that shows up, but I don't think that's the right message. Oh, that's my message. Huh. Well, maybe it is the right one. Let's just see if I can get it to show yours. Did that work? Yes, it did. Okay. And it's being a little touchy about that bar at top tonight. And I don't know why it did that. So I'm just going to ignore it. And we're going to pretend that everything is working just the way it should be working. Okay. So the I didn't make a whole lot today either. I think as it turned out, the typically in the summer months, I can make 70 with the house, and I think I was at 14 or 15 today. The solar shed, I don't know if you guys know yet, but the solar shed has 15 250 watt panels. 6 of them are pointed almost premium location with quite a bit of an angle, maybe 45 degrees. It's really good for this time of year. Um, but during the summer, I'll probably have to change that to a more dramatic, a little less of an angle. I've got another 10 panels that faced that same type of angle that are facing east. And so they get that afternoon sun about about noon or so, noon, 1 o'clock. All of a sudden, it just lights up out there like a Christmas tree, and I get lots of power. So max that I've seen so far is about 2200, 2300 watts. Not really big, but I'm still working on just get that. I just kind of threw those panels up against 10 of them are against the wall, and 5 of them are leaning against the shed. I don't know if I've included any pictures in any of the videos yet with them, but I'll get you guys some pictures for that and kind of show you what's going on there. But no, I didn't make a whole lot of solar today either. It was kind of a bust. I did the last 3 or 4 days, though, made up for what we lost last week, because right after I got the shed hooked up, that 3 days of cloudiness hit and the solar production just dropped like a rock. And when it dropped like a rock, that's what really brought this subject up to me. So depending on where you live, you're going to want to consider what is the typical outage. Here in Florida, we end up with in NSB, I think I would say that it's probably around 3 days is really, for the most part, how it happens. Those are the bad ones. You usually, you get an hour here, an hour there, or a rainstorm here, a rainstorm there. But usually, if we're going to have a long-term outage, isn't much more than 3 or 4 days. It's not like I know in Dallas we would have them, and sometimes you could go 7 or 8 days without really any major thing. Then you have other parts of the country. You're gonna have to determine really where you're at. But you can also reduce some of the risk there with running generators. So let's talk about what determines what type of impact can this have. So let's talk about what autonomy, the 3 variables that really come into it is, what is your daily usage, which is this here. And this is the total that you're using for the whole day. And you don't want to take into account anything else at this point, because you want this number raw like it was here. Of course, if you've got some sun, you're always going to get some certain percentage of power. But for our purposes of doing this exercise, and for my purpose of doing these exercises, we want to look at the total usage per day. And in our example, we're talking about 5 kilowatts. Now, if the second one is the battery capacity. So the first one is going to be, what is your daily usage? And then the second one is going to be the total of your battery storage. Now, in this case, I said it was 10 kilowatt hours. And because I use 5 kilowatt hours a day, we ended up with 2 days of autonomy. And that would be with absolutely no sun whatsoever. Now, a lot of people say, well, you always get something. Now, there are times, and what kicked me off in the solar world was a few years back when I got hit with a hurricane and spent months without, or not months, I spent 10 days without electricity at all. It was months before things were back to normal around here. But that was really what started it off there. And that was truly a 5-day blackout. There was huge hurricane storms before, during, and after. And we got almost, I would say, less than 1% production for those days. And I have 8 panels. NSB says I have 8 panels, and this is my first system. 8 panels is a good start. It gives you a good way to learn. I always suggest that people start with small systems and then build their way up. But 8 panels, even that, isn't a bad sized system. I mean, you can power reasonably large things. I was kind of crazy and went with my full RV system for the very first one. But if looking back, What I should have done is built some very small system with a few panels and a smaller battery and kind of learn what I was doing so I'd know which equipment to buy and stuff. But so there's three pieces of this element here. One is that daily usage. One is that total size of your battery. And the next is the amount of depth of discharge that you're willing to go down to. Some people's system may shut off at, let's say, 10%. And if you only have 10%, then you lose 1 kilowatt and you actually only have 9 kilowatts in this system if your battery shuts off. So if you have your, let's say you have a 6000 XP and it has a depth of discharge to shut the AC off at 10% and then shut the battery off at even a further down percentage, then you would lose that 10% and you can only consider 9 kilowatt hours in your calculation. Now, when that gets very irritating is when you have a solar system of 150 kilowatt hours and it shuts off and leaves you with 15 kilowatts in your battery and you can't run your power, which is why a lot of the times you'll see I don't run with communications, I run with voltage, because with voltage I can run it right down to wherever, as far down as I want. But these are going to be the three things that you need to consider. So you take your total battery power, energy storage, I should say, capacity, and you divide it by your daily usage. And that isn't even right, to be honest with you. Let's do that again. Take a mulligan. You take your total energy storage, your total capacity, let's call it, total capacity minus your minimum amount. And in this case, let's say it's 10%, because that would be with a lot of them would shut down at a certain thing. And this is a very, James, this is a very important point for a lot of people to understand, is that I'm very fortunate in Florida, we don't have to worry about this. As a matter of fact, today is what we consider winter, and today it is 50 degrees outside. And we're looking at maybe getting into the 40s here in the next couple of days. And that's we're going to declare that winter and call it the end. But it's been 70 during the days. That's the difference between our winters and your winters. But one thing for a lot of people to consider is up north, we also have to be concerned about battery heaters and idle consumption. Now, the reason that this is important is that if you're in, this would be considered in your daily consumption, because you should be basing these numbers off of what you really use. And then to what extent you want to take this is where you really need to think about it. And if I was up north, for me here, I may consider summer a little bit different than other days of the month, simply because I run, if I took a calendar and I put it in a chart like this and divided it into 12 pieces, I would say that those summer months here, I use more power because of the AC. I don't really use any extra power in the winter for heat where I am, because the coldest it gets is 50 degrees, which at 50 degrees, you just wait an hour, the sun comes up and you get warm again. I think I turned on the heater last year 5 times. And at no time was it on for more than a couple of hours, and probably morning time to do it. I think some of you other Floridians can vouch for that too. You don't, as a matter of fact, funny story is, here in Florida, when I first moved here, one of the things I had to do was replace my air conditioner. And the house I was in, I talked to the air conditioner guy and I said, yeah, I need to get a new air conditioner. And you're in Texas, you just order an air conditioner, they come in, they install the new air conditioner and they leave. And then a few months later, I realized that in Florida, because it doesn't get cold, there's no heating element in the air conditioner. So the central furnace that goes in the is just nothing more than a blower to run your air over the evaporator coil for your air conditioner. There's an actual module you have to buy that's extra. Now, granted, it's only $60 or $70, but you buy this element to stick in there to allow your unit to have heat. They leave it off because it's a cost savings and so few people actually use it. So kind of a funny story. I ordered one, I had it, and it was months before I realized it didn't even have a heater in it. And so then I had to go back and order one. But I would adjust probably during these 2 months my consumption because of AC usage. But it's very likely that some people would also say, look, January, February, and November and December, I would adjust up for heat. It's obviously um, uh, if you're not using oils and stuff like that. Now, that said, even if you are using oils, so the point James is trying to make here is that you have to keep the batteries warm enough for them to be protected from the cold and doing damage. If they will take a charge if they're under a certain temperature. Most of those temperatures are somewhere around 32 degrees, 35 degrees, somewhere in that area. And so you're going to want to, most of the batteries will come with heaters in them. And then when they automatically click on and keep themselves warm and then shut off when they're done. But that becomes idle consumption that just eats away at your battery slowly over time. So that's something that you have to consider in these figures. So you may want to recalculate that for different times of the year based on where you live. But the basic concept is to come up with what is your total usage during a 24-hour period. Now, something like a home assistant makes that very easy because you can just go in and say, what's my average, what is my usage for these 3 months and divide it by 90, or this month and divide it by 30, and you could make this chart pretty easy based on month. Now, where this becomes important is that where you want to do, when you want to build a system, you need to understand what are the important factors in why is autonomy important. Now let's talk about it. If you have most people, and I'm going to give you most people scenarios, and then we can go over a couple of examples. Most people look at having 2 to 3 days of autonomy. Now, when you think about 2 to 3 days of autonomy like you have here, that doesn't mean that you can only run for 2 to 3 days. So let's take, for example, today, although we did not get a significant amount of sun, as NSB noted, we also didn't get no sun. And that means that if you are using 5 kilowatt hours a day used, and you are generating 1 kilowatt hour a day, then technically you've only used 4 kilowatts in that day, and that would extend the time that you have. And we may have a day where you only generate 1, but you may generate 3 on the next day. Then you may generate 9 on the next day. So technically having these 2 days of autonomy doesn't necessarily mean that you can live for only 2 days. It means that that is the minimum that you would be stuck with your pants down and not have any power. And that's why we use that as a number, because it allows you a good basis to start measuring things and take those things that you know. Other items that you can use, the trade-off of having, let's talk about the trade-offs and then we'll come back to other things you can do to make that more efficient in a manner that would be even more productive for you. So let's look at one of the things that you could do is, and I'm going to break this down into, let's say, 1 to 2 days. And then I think I made a list of a couple of examples here, 2 to 3 days. And then most of the time, you don't see too many people go over much more to 4 to 7 days. Now, what is the ups and downs with each of these? 1 to 2 days, there's very few places that you can go with 1 to 2 days and reliably outlive a typical storm. But you could do it with the use of a generator. So the problem is the downside to doing 1 to 2 days is that you're probably going to need a generator of some kind in order to make it work. The upside is that your batteries are one of your largest costs, and so you're going to save a little bit. So you may save on batteries, but you need a generator. Now let's talk about 2 to 3 days. And this is where most people see that, at least in my RV, I saw this huge difference between 2 to 3 days. Once I passed that 2-day mark, and I was at 2.8, 2.9 days when I was here. And once I passed to this point here, I noticed that you can outlive a lot of bad stuff. A day of bad sun here on 1 to 2 days, and then you're thinking, okay, well, it depends on when the storm started. If the storm started at 7 in the morning, and I've got 1.2 days of sun. If it started in the morning, 24 hours would be the next day, and I may not even have, or I may run into another nighttime starting or something like that. And then that would be the problem of doing it that way. It made it very difficult to recover. Here, all of a sudden, it got to where I would go months without having to worry about my power, simply because I could outlive a day with it being off, and a day with a partial sun, and a third day with a little bit of less sun, and then a fourth day with partial sun. And those compounded a percentage save here of 30% and on day 2 and 40% on day 3 added up to a whole new day. So now instead of having 2.5 days, I had 3.5 days, or I had 4.5 days, and then I'd get a little bit more sun the next day, and that combined with the previous one would give me another day, and then I would have 5 days, and by the time 5 days was up, I could outlive whatever storm there was there. So this is where I saw the biggest benefits. But I also saw a increase in cost of things where I didn't always use the batteries that were there. So for the majority of the time, the batteries didn't go down unless I was in one of those windows below 50, 60%. So you're cycling every day from, instead of using the availability of your battery, let's say you only run it down to 10% every night, you could theoretically discharge this down to 10% using, let's say it's a 10 kilowatt hour battery. You discharge this 8 kilowatts every day, and then you charge back up 8 kilowatt hours every day. And let's say in order to do this, you have, 15 kilowatt of power coming from your solar panels. And that allows you to charge while you're running your house during the day so that your batteries can recover from the next day. The big difference, and one of the big differences and misconceptions, is that more panels give you more autonomy. It doesn't necessarily give you more autonomy, because in this case, all you can store is 15 kilowatt hours. And that means no matter how much power we collect, even if we change this to 2015 kilowatt hours of power, you still can only put 10 kilowatt hours in that battery. And if that storm hits 10 minutes before the sun comes up, then you're going to not make it 24 hours, or you're going to be cutting it very close, and you're going to be out of battery power. And therefore, that's why it's very important to understand that more panels don't necessarily increase the autonomy, and that's why it's important when you do this calculation that you can't zero input. It's a bonus when it's there. And where does that break point? Somewhere, I would say somewhere around 2.5 to 3 days of autonomy has a real good sweet spot for where I live. If I was further north, I might find that that autonomy is up a little bit higher in the 4 or the 5 days. And to be honest with you, I don't know. I've never had to deal with it. The only time I have dealt with what I needed to deal with on autonomy is when I'm traveling. Now, when I'm traveling up north, and like annually when we go to Connecticut for the Mohican Sun or something like that up in Connecticut, the weather is beautiful, so I don't use the air conditioner. So my batteries rarely go below 70% or so. And I'm usually not there during the day because when you're traveling, you're usually not doing your day-to-day living. You're doing what I call vacation living, and vacation living is quite different than day-to-day living. And it's something that most of us should pay really close attention to when you're working these hours. Are you a weekend warrior where you're going out and you need 2 days to go camping, and where you're going to be there every minute of the day? Or are you going camping where you're going to go out and go hiking every day? And when you come up with your autonomy calculations and how much you're using in a day, make sure you're using the same usage figures or very similar, because they can be very different. When I'm at home and I was working and I had, the Starlink hooked up and the TV on, and you're cooking and you're running your air conditioner during the day, and you're doing all of this stuff, I could use 25 to 30 kilowatt hours in a day in my RV. When I go up north to a convention, I could use 6, and I didn't want for anything. It's not like I made a conscious effort to use less. It's just it's cooler, so I didn't need the air conditioner as much. I wasn't there all day, so the door wasn't being opened and closed constantly, so I didn't use there wasn't that open the door and the RV loses all of its cool. So that is one of the things that I found is here. Now, the downside to 2 to 3 days is you still probably are going to run into those times where you still need a generator. Even here, we run into times where if we had a hurricane, that we would still need a generator to do this. So there's still some risk here that you're gonna have a problem. Now, the difference is between needing a generator for this and running on a generator is that here I would turn on the generator and I'd buy one that I could turn up full blast and run it straight into the batteries, and not have the generator just constantly running all day long, slurping on gas. I would take a 6,000 or a 5,000 watt generator, run it at about 80% straight into the batteries, and forget about it. So that way it could run for a couple of hours, and then maybe I would have 2 to 3 days of autonomy, and it'd be 2 or 3 days before I need to run it again, at worst case scenario. So that's really the difference here. Then you have 4 to 7 days. Now, the benefits here are enormous. You most likely can make it past probably any major storm. I remember after the hurricane last year, as soon as the storm was gone, the skies clear up, your batteries charge up, and 2 days later, you're so used to living with so little that your electricity becomes abundant. The downside is cost. This one has a real cost factor bigger than most of the other ones. This one has a little cost because you need a little extra battery. And I'm going to put, this one has, and you still need a generator. So, but it comes with a little risk. This one comes with high risk. And this one comes with low risk. Now, low risk is made up for with cost in this case. Now, you're going to spend a ton more on batteries in order to make this risk extremely low, because these 4 or 5 days with no solar power is probably a bit crazy. I would find it very hard to believe that in 5 days I couldn't get, let's say an average of 10 to 20% charge rate. And even at, very cloudy days, 10 to 20% over a period of 5 to 7 days is still going to be 70% for 7 days at 10%, 140% of a day at 20%. So you can still make a huge chunk and extend this 7 days to 12 or 15 days, even in extremely bad weather. And then you get one good day in there and a lot of it can be replenished. Now, this is when that solar power does become important. How quickly can you recover? But that's not really about autonomy. That's about recovery rates and how big your solar system needs to be for you to recover, because you're going to want to make sure that you have enough power to charge your based on your daily here. My thoughts on this, and different people like to see different things. I like to charge at about 10 to 20% a day above and beyond. So if you looked at one of my charts, and let's say that I had a battery that looked like this, and every day there was no sun and it would kind of like go like this, which is what it did the last few days. Day one here, day two there, day three, and it slows down a little bit right here during the day when the sun's out because it kind of struggles to get enough power to keep you floating. And it doesn't necessarily go down as fast as it could. It does, but it doesn't look like a typical solar day. Whereas during the night it goes down, during the day it goes up. During the night it goes down, during the day it goes up. This would be a typical day, and in my case, it just continued to go down a little bit every day. But once I was able to get past that 3 days of loss, day one, I'm at 80%. Day two, I'm at 60%. Day three, I'm at 40%. And I'm thinking, oh crap, here it comes. This is going to be a long, nasty, ugly winter. Yuck. But on day four, the sun came back out. And I went from 40% to not only covering the 20% that I would have used here, but to charging back to 80%. And then the next day when I woke up, I was down at 60% and it charged back up to 90%. And the next day it charged back up to 100%. So it took me a few days to get back my autonomy and to earn it back. But that was in order to keep the cost of the solar panels down so that I didn't have too big of a system here that just wasted that extra power. Because on a normal day over here, I can recover easily. So you don't want to spend the extra on those panels unless you have some place to put that power to give you that extra autonomy. Now, if I had battery bank of, let's say I was using I had a 10 kilowatt bank and I had 2 days of autonomy, and I wanted 10 days of autonomy, so I wanted a 50 kilowatt battery, then I may consider the fact that I might want to be able to recover a little bit faster than a few percentage points every day, so that I have the ability to have in the middle of a stormy season at day 5 or 6, and I have one good day of sun, that I can take advantage of it and recover multiple days at one time. As it stands, I can't. I can recover about 1 day of losses in 1 day, meaning I can collect twice of what it cost me a day to operate. If it costs me 5 kilowatts to operate, I can generate about 10, and that allows me to operate. So that's based on the new solar shed today with the current setup and the way things are going. It takes into account all of the different variables going on there and everything up in that. But so the important thing to understand here is more panels doesn't increase your autonomy. What it does is it increases your recovery rate, and it will decrease your consumption during the day when you're having one of those bad days. But autonomy is calculated without sun, not with low sun and partial. That's how you can extend it. And we'll get a little bit more into that here in a little bit. A lot of people think that autonomy only matters when you're off grid. And I want to make sure that we clear this misconception up. Autonomy is about when the grid goes out, how long can you operate? So if you're off grid, then obviously it's important. But if you're hybrid, it is also important because it would mean that if you don't have enough battery power to do anything but to make it past, let's say you build a system that's designed to do nothing but to live past a 3-hour window in the evening and in the morning when your rates are triple what they normally are. With no autonomy, you will use your power that evening, and in the next morning you will use it again, and your batteries are dead. And therefore you no longer have a solar system of any value to help you. Now, if you build up some autonomy, then that would allow you to operate beyond the point of that and help you there. But it doesn't, so it does matter, even though you're not technically off grid. Some people have different opinions, and it depends on who you ask about this number here, this reserve number. I have extremely different opinions about this than most people, and I'll explain why. So let's talk a little bit about it. I'll take a few minutes and explain my thoughts on it. Wow, that did not come clean at all, did it? Yuck. Try another napkin here, see if I can get it to. It's a little bit better. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the 10 kilowatt battery, 10 kilowatt hour battery that we have. Now, that means that if you are looking at using only the top 90%, and you're going to use 10% in reserve, a lot of people claim that if you use this 10%, that it is harmful to your battery. And I don't necessarily disagree with the fact that it causes more harm than not using it. At the same time, practically everything is going to cause more harm than not using it. So my thought is that if this battery is designed for 80% life expectancy with 80% depth of discharge, that means that I have to reserve 20% of my battery to maybe get 20% back 10 years down the road. I don't see how the math works out. If I use that 20% every day, then I would get 10 times that over the period of that 10 years of the warranty. And I don't see any real evidence that suggests that the damage is going to be more significant than the losses of not using the battery. And what I mean by this is, let's say you buy a 1 kilowatt battery and you use it every day 100%. But if you buy a 10 of them, you will have 10 kilowatt hours of battery. But if you need to keep 20% in reserve, then that means you have to buy 2 extra batteries to have 12 kilowatts to be able to use 10. And in my mind, maybe this battery being in better shape after, and people say, well, how do you know how long it's gonna last? Well, let's just use some of the math. They're claiming that a lot of these batteries have 7,000 cycles, maybe 10,000 cycles. I've seen some with 15,000 cycles. But let's take the best case scenario, and let's say they say 5,000 cycles. A cycle can be defined in multiple ways, but the most generous way is a percentage of usage over a period of time. And let's say that it's they call a cycle it discharging one day and charging back up the next. So let's say that every day is a cycle, regardless if that cycle is 30% or 100%. We're going to call it every single day. Now, if I take 365 and divide it into this, I'm going to come up with 365 somewhere around 14, 15 years. So I got 14 years on a battery with 5,000 cycles if I cycle it every single day. Now, maybe if I only use 80% of what I paid for, I might have some of the capacity, some higher capacity than the 80% when I get there. Doesn't make any sense to me. So I'm saying no. I'm going to use my battery all the way from the top to the bottom when I need it, and I will worry about that percentage that may or may not be there 15 years from now, 15 years from now, if the batteries even need to be. Life of the battery, age is going to kill the batteries more than use. You cannot use these batteries. That's 5,000. It's 10,000, it's 28 years. At 15,000, it's 42 years. Is that right? 42 years. You are not going to use this battery enough to make up for the cost of not having it when you did it. So that is my thought there, is that you don't want to worry about that 10%. But a lot of the inverters will not allow you to make that change. They won't allow you to, wow, that's little lines across the screen the whole time. I didn't even notice that. Sorry, guys. If I'd have noticed, I would have gotten rid of it a long time ago. There we go. So that's my thought behind that, is the batteries are going to age out long before they wear out. So use them. You have the capacity. Don't buy 20% more batteries so that you may get 20% 15 years from now. It doesn't make any sense. All right. Let's talk about a couple of real world examples. In an RV, if you were using an RV and you had 1 to 2 days autonomy and you were camping, chances are you would probably be in pretty good shape. You would probably need, as we said earlier, a little generator in order to cover yourself, but your recovery rate would be pretty easy because you wouldn't have thousands of kilowatt hours in there. You would probably only have 5 or 10 kilowatt hours. So you could charge up pretty quick. You could also charge up pretty quick if you were in a park or something like that. A shed or a workshop, 2 to 3 days of autonomy is what I'm planning on doing in the solar shed as I rebuild it. I know that the bonuses are there. I have a couple of days of bad weather here, and I want to be able to run freezers and refrigerators. And the solar shed is, I believe, going to end up being 100% off grid, meaning there will be no grid connection to it at all. And that means that if it does run out of power, I will lose freezers and the food, the milk and stuff in the coffee trailer will go bad. So I won't probably end up with anything other than 2 to 3 days there, and then be very cautious about how I'm going to deal with. Now, fortunately, my house is only 50 yards away, so it should be able to regenerate or plug in on an occasion when I absolutely do need it. At the same time, I want to make sure that I have that backup power in case the grid goes out for a hurricane or something like that, where I can backfeed into the house as in place of the generator and provide me power there. On a house, 3 to 5 days autonomy is where you probably would want to fall in, because you're talking about a much bigger scenario, and you're not going to want to be pulling out a generator every couple of days to charge up a huge house-sized battery. So you're probably going to want to keep a little bit more. Now, let's choosing the target size is where this becomes a little bit tricky. Understanding how big of a system you're willing to deal with is something that each of us has to take a few things into account. We talked about a few of them. Your local weather patterns obviously are going to have some impact on how much autonomy you have. For example, you live in Arizona or you live in Florida where you have mostly sunny weather. You're not going to need as much autonomy as you would need if you were in Washington where you have constant rain, or even some of the places up north in Canada where you have tons of snow during the winter and you're not able to get out and uncover your panels and stuff like that. Then autonomy and the number of days becomes enormously important, because the loss of power in that case is an extreme problem, as opposed to here it's an inconvenience. We go find a generator and get it charged up because it's not bitter cold outside. Um, and that's another thing that also can affect your level of autonomy and comfort levels there. Whether you're a 1 to 2 day, a 3 to 5 day, a 5 to 10 day type person, depends also strongly upon whether you have a generator that can replenish your batteries in those emergency situations, and whether those are automatic or manual. If you're going out every 24 hours and plugging in a generator and having to watch it really close, you may feel differently about it than if it came on automatically and you only had 12 hours of autonomy, but you didn't even hear it because it was in some, shed somewhere off in the corner of your property. It came on, charged up your batteries, and shut back off, and you didn't even notice it. So you may think of it differently there, but that's something that you'd want to do. Um, Also, you want to think about what's critical versus non-critical. And what I mean by that is, if you are, let's say you have a solar shed and it's for charging your tools and running your shop vac and that type of stuff. Well, if you're in the middle of a hurricane or you're in the middle of a weather storm or a snowstorm or something like that, you're not going to care about those tools. And so it doesn't really have much of an impact on you if the battery did go low one way or another. But if you are like me, using it for critical type things where the main house freezer is out there, it's connected to all of the supplies within the food truck, and you want to make sure that you don't lose those. Or if you're out where you're truly off grid in an off grid cabin, or your house is out, where it's off completely out in nowhere, or you're looking at a true hurricane situation, then you might want to think about what that's more of a critical type thing. Then you have to consider what you have for critical loads versus non-critical loads. And we can talk a little bit about critical loads versus non-critical loads, because this is something that a lot of people, especially when things start to go bad, they don't realize it in time to understand the difference. And this is something you should sit down and truly think about before you build your system. So let's highlight a little bit of difference between critical and non-critical loads. And for some people, it's different. So, and what I call critical loads is, let's look at non-critical, not critical, and critical. Um, so let's look at things like a vacuum cleaner. A vacuum cleaner is a non-critical. You could go a couple of days extra without turning on your vacuum cleaner because, yeah, your house would be a little bit more messy, but it really truly is a luxury item that you're not going to worry about. Some of those that are different. Let's talk about a refrigerator. If your refrigerator goes out, if you lose your refrigerator, I call that a critical load, because a refrigerator keeps your food fresh, keeps your medicine safe, it provides you with a way to survive during those times of outage. Now, you may be in an area, let's say where you're up north, and your outage is cold weather, and then you can use Mother Nature for that. But I still would think that a refrigerator or a freezer of some sort is a critical type load that you would want to make sure was running all the time. Let's talk about one that's a little bit more controversial, and let's call hot water an item. Um, for some people, especially when you're not talking about the person who's building the system that has to provide this and understand what hot water's usage is versus what its benefits are, it is very difficult to explain to someone that yes, when in a hurricane, no, you're not going to have hot water because we deemed it not critical. And so you can't take a shower every day because the water pump is the critical load so that you have water to drink and can survive the next 3 or 4 days as opposed to be able to take a shower every day. So in my mind, and some may have a different opinion of this, and sometimes it depends on how much power and how big your system is. I would say that hot water is a not critical load. It's a huge consumer of power, and over a period of normal use, to say that you have to have it for a 5 or 7 day period, I don't believe is true. If you didn't have it, you would need to maybe boil water to sanitize things and things like that in a real disaster case. But in a normal operating case, a hot water would be considered not critical. Although if you are a well water user, your well pump would be considered a critical load in my mind, because obviously you can't do anything without safe, clean water to cook with. Now, could you have a storage tank and have it in there and then this become non-critical because you have stored enough water to do this? Absolutely, you can do that. And that would cause it to fall over into this category. But these are the type of things that you're going to have to look at if you're building a system with a level of autonomy that you need to understand what is the impact of these items versus not having it, and what are you trying to accomplish. In my mind, in a hurricane scenario, and let's take a couple of scenarios like I had a few years ago where the power went out, and yeah, it sucked to live without the electric power for 7 to 10 days. I think we ended up at 9.5 days. Somewhere in the middle of the night, the power came on, and it didn't quite make it to 10. But the the idea here is a lot of people don't realize that not being able to charge your cell phone is short-term critical load, meaning you want to be able to charge your cell phone. But what most people don't realize is in a major disaster like that, when the power goes off, widespread outage, all of the cell towers, all of the internet wireless routers, all of the stuff that's provided to provide that service to you is running on a battery backup that is probably 24 to 48, maybe 72 hours. They have their own autonomy timelines. And after 24, 48, 72 hours, they were all out. We had no cell service. We had no water service from the normal city water. You had no any of those type of services. Internet service gone. Even if I had power to power the router or to power the cable TV or to power any of that stuff, none of it worked anyway because the routers providing that service to me were out, because their time of autonomy, I'm suspecting, was around 48 hours. Because for the first day, we could plug in the generator. It was great. You could get this. Now, what commonly happens in these cases is that you classify a lot of these items as critical on this side. Well, I need to be able to run the hot water heater. I need to be able to run the well water. I need to be able to run this. I need to be able to run that. And what ends up happening is you eat away at that autonomy. And then when the real disaster happens, your autonomy of 7 days ends up being 7 days instead of 14. Whereas if you had shifted some of these early on and realized how serious the case is, you can turn a 5-day autonomy system into a 10-day. by a simple change. For example, if the well water turns on every time you turn on the faucet and stuff, how much power does that use? As opposed to if I turned it on once when the power went off and filled up some drinking water jugs and then shut that off, turned that breaker off and didn't use the well water for flushing my toilets and running my sinks and stuff. The difference in the mindset here is to plan the disaster and not the average outage. If you're looking for an average outage, then this critical load scenario may be completely different. So I'll give you an example. Power here is pretty consistent. I don't have many outages, a couple of year, taking storms out of the scenario. And usually they're very short-lived and they're very non-problematic. Autonomy for something like that, you could have a whole house backup that kicked on and provide every service that you have pretty easily. So if you have a house that's typical usage of 30 kilowatt hours a day, it's not unheard of to have 60, 90, 120 kilowatt hour battery to provide multiple days of service. But at the same time, if you are in a disaster, a hurricane, or something like that, where you're not going to have service for the next 30 days, as time goes by, a lot of those critical loads that should have been non-critical were misclassified early on. And by the time you know it, it's too late. So it's usually better to err on the wrong side of this than on the right side of this, and to make those critical loads optional critical loads. And what I mean by that is, okay, the well pump, if it was an optional critical load, where I knew when the power went out, I go over here and I turn this breaker off, and I provide for backup water service for drinking water at however many gallons per day per person, then I know, okay, 3 days in, I need to replenish my water supply, and my critical loads becomes less of a demand, and my autonomy can be extended by reducing the demand for the critical loads. That meaning simple things, big usage things like an oven. Now, a lot of people will say an oven can be a critical load because you have to be able to cook dinner, you have to have a stove to warm things up on and stuff like that. To an extent, that is true. At the same time, it's non-critical in that you could easily use a barbecue grill with a propane burner to accomplish the same thing in a massive disaster. Now, would you want to do that for a simple power outage because of a brownout, like in in California, where they have the brownouts where the power just goes off for a couple of hours here and there? No, you wouldn't. So in that case, you would want that backed up. If you're looking at long term, though, then you would want to reclassify that as non-critical or optional non-critical, where you would turn it on, you might cook dinner, or you might cook a whole bunch of food for the next 3 or 4 days here and there in order to get things to work. One of the things I found that was a great critical load that opposes this one here, which was the refrigerator, is during the last hurricane, the one thing I had in the coffee trailer was a giant 10 cubic inch freezer. And in that freezer, I had just prepared to go to a large event, and I had 380 pounds of ice in it. Now, it worked out very much to my favor because keeping that freezer cold when you have that much ice in it is extremely easy. But what ice is also good for is providing refrigeration. So I was able to use a small amount of the ice to keep some of the food or medicine that I needed cold in a small cooler, as opposed to keeping the entire refrigeration unit on for the entire time. And it provided a great emergency backup. Now, as it turns out, before I ran out of gas 10 days into this, Some of the gas stations started to open back up and I was able to get gas. Many of the people around me did not have that luxury. They came in with their generators, they turned them on, and what people don't realize is just because you have a generator does not mean you have fuel to run the generator. And if you're going to run that generator every day, all day, in place of a solar system, you're going to use a lot of gas. And when the gas is gone, it's gone. And most people tend to underestimate what that gas is going to cost them. So that's something in your autonomy numbers you need to look at is if I have to run the generator because I am truly without sun, and let's say that it's a giant fire and the smoke fills the skies and you can't get any sun and it lasts for a month. What would you do to get power at that point? Because if the power went out, then you would have smoke consistently there and it wouldn't just go away. So that is one of the things that you could put on here. I put this one as optional, and I put the freezer with ice as a better backup because it allowed me to keep frozen foods, keep them nice and solid. The ice allowed me to have refrigeration, and it was 10 times, I don't say 10 times, it was a lot easier to keep this cold in a deep freeze with those deep freeze freezers keeping things at, sub-zero. There were times when I would actually put a partial bag of ice into a cooler, and the water that had accumulated in the bottom of the cooler would freeze because the ice is so cold. Instead of it just immediately starting to melt, it would be hours before it actually had cooled off enough for the water that had been in there that refroze even started to melt the second time. So that is one of the options that I would consider here when doing this. Now, I don't know who that was. James. Thank you, James. James says that most 72 hours for telecom for most sites. And that I actually believe. I can support that and say that that's about what it was when all of the cell phones stopped working, your text messages no longer work, your cable TV, even if you did have it, it wouldn't work, your internet didn't work. And what good is it to charge a phone? What good is it to have all that extra power if none of it works anyway? That was the part that was a real eye-opener to me, is that all of those ancillary services that temporarily are there usually, and you can plug in a generator for a day or two, is completely different in a real disaster, because after 72 hours, as James says here, all of a sudden the cell phones no longer work. I had very hard time communicating at all with anyone because my cell phone no longer worked. But I would look at the oh, and I didn't put that message up on the screen because I shut those off, didn't I? Let's put that back up here. Where is it? That one. 72 hours for telecom, most sites. And I would say that that's absolutely right. So looking at the different types of devices that you would go through on this, and you could say that lights are a necessity, but what I would do is I would limit those lights, and I'd be prepared with those lights that are LEDs. The LED lights are probably a necessity, but I would limit the circuits that are on or off. I would put them on the critical loads panel, but I would shut some of them off if the power was to go off, and put this in a partial optional state where I would shut off a whole bunch of them and it had the basic ones there. And then if you had the sense that it was very short-lived, no big deal. If it was when a hurricane hits, like in my case, you really don't have any idea until it's done how bad it's going to be. This last one, I expected it to be nothing, and it took 10 days of my life away with no communication with the outside world. Let's see, what else do I have here? So setting your target for what you have, setting your critical loads for what you want there, and then ability to reduce these critical loads becomes your next biggest weapon in doing that. And the more you reduce these, the longer you extend that autonomy. So if you've got let's say you've got your 5 kilowatt hours of autonomy, but you can reduce, and that gives you 2 days. If you can reduce this to 2 kilowatts of absolute critical, then your 2 days of autonomy turns into 10 days of autonomy. And in 10 days, if you're generating 10%, you may get an extra 2 or 3 days on top of that. So now that 10 days turns into 12 or 13 days. And that is the difference between surviving that natural disaster and being a statistic in that national disaster. So I would say some LED lights are important here. The ability to reduce this critical load or at least turn them off when you don't need them. Some people do a critical loads panel where everything in there needs to come on so that you can just run it with a generator. Some people do the backfeed into the main panel, and from there they just shut off the ones they want. That's my preferred method. But not everyone likes it that way. Some people like to have that defined critical loads panel, which makes it a little bit nicer if you want to run those critical loads and use some power saving methods off of your solar system. And I also encourage that, as it's not just there for the disaster. The autonomy can be used the rest of the year to shave off the edges of your electric bill. If you've got 5 kilowatt hours and 2 days of autonomy, and you know there's no bad weather coming, there's no reason that if you can regenerate this battery every day, you could run on that power unless you saw something coming. This happened to me quite often in the RV. When I was traveling in the RV, what I would do is if I saw a storm coming, I would change the RV to charge up the batteries and operate as an UPS machine, which basically meant that it would charge the batteries off of the grid and it would get prepared. And if the power went off, it would switch to battery mode. And if the power was on, it would charge the batteries. But I would not run that normally, because normally then I would have to pay for the electric bill. What I would do normally is I would just say, run off of the batteries and run the full day up and down, up and down, up and down every day. And then when I ran into problems, which usually it would run down into about 60, 70% each day. 70% was more likely, depends on how hot it was, how much direct sun we had, when that sun was, what time of year it was, that kind of stuff. But that allowed for that autonomy to carry me through and eliminate my electric bill when I was traveling also. A lot of RVs are very inefficient when it comes to things like that, and you end up spending. I could use 25 to 30 kilowatt hours a day, almost like a home in an RV, and that was with replacing the air conditioners with mini splits. Before I replaced the air conditioners with mini splits, you could be on the ups of 40 to 50 kilowatts a day in an RV, and that was just crazy. Okay, so let's get back to what we were talking about here. What was I talking about? The ability to reduce your usage is really what's important. One of the most common questions I get is, how many days of autonomy do most systems have? And I don't think there is a most. I would suspect that most people end up between 2 and 3 days is what the autonomy of what most of them have. They plan for one, and if you plan for one, you're probably going to see some outages even with the solar system. If you plan for 2 or 3, you probably can outlive most large storms and problems. And if you plan for 7 to 10, like in the larger scale ones that we talked about, you're going to almost make it through almost any type of problem that you're going to have there. Almost. the amount of risk you're willing to take versus um, uh, uh, knowing that the system is always there. The biggest problem with a system like this is that a lot of people don't test them until it's too late. They don't check their generators to make sure that they can actually run and power up everything. One good practice to do, and it drives my wife crazy sometimes, is I'll say, okay, we're gonna do a practice run, and you turn the grid off and run for a couple of days that way and find out, does your system really perform the way you want? You will be surprised at the things that you find that you thought you were going to need that make no difference whatsoever. And you will also be surprised at just how willing you are to give some things up for a day or two, and then make damn sure you get them back after that. So that's it. So what is the most common? Somewhere around 2 to 3 days, I would say, is probably the most common. Unfortunately, there's far more with less than that below it than there is above it. A lot of the solar systems, especially installed here in the United States, are grid-tied solar systems with no battery at all. And they are nothing more than energy-saving devices. The solar generates power. The power is either used by the house or sent to the grid, where you get some kind of credit back for that extra power that you generated. And that's about it. That's all they do. They have no battery storage. They have nothing. As a matter of fact, when the storms hit and the grid goes out, so does your solar system. And you get none of the benefit of that, which was probably one of the most impactful lessons that I learned when we went through the hurricane and did that 10 days, is that I had 13.5 kilowatt hours of power on the roof, and none of it could be used because it was a complete grid-tied system with no battery backups, and I couldn't do anything but run some little solar system to keep the ice frozen in the food trailer, and that was it. Okay. Is 1 day of autonomy ever enough? Yeah, 1 day of autonomy is enough a lot of the times. It depends on what you're trying to do with the system. If you were trying to shave off some of your electric bill for a couple of hours at night when the electric company charges you more, or if you're trying to shave off in the morning when you get up in the morning and the electric company is charging you a lot there, then 1 day works fine for that, because that also can cover you when you have that 20-minute power outage or brownout or blackout, or the common, a guy hit a telephone pole and it takes a couple of hours for the electric company to repair it. There's a lot that 1 day of autonomy can protect you from, especially when a lot of the times, if you have the 1 day of autonomy, you also have solar when the power is out. That's the big difference here, is that 1 day autonomy rarely is truly only good for 1 day. A lot of it depends on how much sun you have. You use 1 day as a calculation so that you can kind of get an idea of how much you need, so that we can say, hey, look, you need about 2.5 to 3 days to be safe. Otherwise, that calculation would be me saying, well, it's hard to say, it depends on your usage and blah, blah, blah. This way, it's easy for me to say, look, if you've got 3 days of autonomy, you're going to live through most storms, weather problems, and that type of stuff. If you're very careful with 3 days, you can stretch that to 5, 6, 7 days easily. And with a generator, you can make it through most disasters. With 5 to 7 days, you can probably do it without even paying too much attention to the system itself, unless you know it's a major catastrophe, and then you may even want to slow down then to protect yourself. But 1 day, yes, 1 day can definitely provide you with enough. So it is enough for a lot of different scenarios, just not the long-term scenarios. Do I need more autonomy in the winter? This is a loaded question. If you are in Canada, yes, you probably need more autonomy in the winter than you will, but that's not going to be you need it more in the winter. That's going to be you need it more in your location. So for example, here in Florida, I need less autonomy in the winter. Yes, I have less sunlight, but I have a lot less usage than I have. So instead of me using the air conditioner for 7 hours a day, like I would in the summer, where it runs for 7 of those hours straight. I might only have the air conditioner run for an hour or two, and I may have a heater run for a few minutes. So for me, no, I don't need more in this winter. I may need more in the summer for a rainstorm. Because if I've got 95-degree weather outside and 90% humidity because it's raining and it's still hot and sticky, I'm still going to need that air conditioner to be comfortable. Now, do I need it to survive? No, I do not need it for survive. And this is where it becomes critical versus non-critical. Where do you draw the line? If you are one of those people who like to sleep in a cold, cold room, your wife might say, put the little mini split that cools the bedroom off over here in the critical load. When you're saying it's more important that the next day we're able to have refrigeration so we can feed ourselves during a hurricane than it is to have air conditioning at night. And those are the kind of decisions that you've got to look at and decide. So in winter, in some locations, yeah, you will need more autonomy in the winter because a snowstorm is just as maybe even worse than depends on how much you like winter. I hate winter. So a snowstorm is a lot worse than a thunderstorm for me because a thunderstorm goes away and my panels clean themselves off and everything goes back to normal the next day. Um, so that would be it. Now, in the case that I was in, let's say Arizona, and we had a heat wave and there was a brownout of the heat wave, then the just the opposite would be true because most likely if I had a brownout because of a heat wave, I would also have a lot of solar, not necessarily more than I would when it was cool, but I would still have a lot. It's unlikely it would be cloudy and rainy during a heat wave. So most likely I would have at least full sun, even if I had a reduced production because of the heat, the solar panels being hot, they produce less. Um, does adding panels increase autonomy? No, adding panels, when we talk about this, the autonomy is based on your battery size divided by the amount of power you use each day, and how many days of autonomy you have is how long you could run if you unplug the solar panels. And that means totally off without any assistance from grid, from solar, from any other type of, not solar, yeah, from anything technically. So that's what your autonomy is based on. That doesn't equate to how long can you survive with 3 days, 2 days of autonomy. It's just a way to measure it to give you an idea of how much is a good measure of how much you need. So adding panels increases the recovery time. So let's say that you have a house that has, uses 15 kilowatts a day to operate, and you've got 10 days of autonomy. You would have 150 kilowatt hours of power. Now, if you were able to recharge those panels every day, then you would pretty much be able to survive just about anything. But let's reverse the situation. Let's say you had 1 kilowatt hour of power and you had 150 kilowatt of power to 1 kilowatt hour of battery and 150 kilowatts of power in solar panels. It doesn't matter how many solar panels you have at that point. When that 1 kilowatt battery is full and the sun goes down, you have 1 kilowatt. You may not even have enough autonomy to make it overnight, let alone make it through multiple days of a storm. So that's where the panels can help you during the day to replenish, and you need to make sure you have enough to provide your devices with power during that day and enough to charge. And for me, the best rule of thumb there is to have about 20% charge on my batteries every day, even if I'm using it full usage and charge 20% of my batteries, meaning that it could take me up to 5 days of full sun to go from 0 power in my batteries to 100% charged. That keeps the number of panels rational. If you can have more, that's not a problem. A lot of solar crazies like myself, will, put in a lot more than just, they have 10 kilowatts of batteries and they'll have 20 kilowatts of solar panels, which means they can replenish every day no matter what happens. If you've got the room for it, they're not too expensive, go for it. But for a normal operating system, it's not really necessary. Um, Talking, do I need, let's see, there we go. How do you size autonomy if the loads vary? You size it based on average per day. So the loads are going to vary. You're going to have the refrigerator is going to kick on and kick off, and you're not going to try to measure every one of your little devices and say, okay, this one does this and this one does that. A lot of people do an audit that way, and they keep track of everything. But you need to know what your average daily usage is. And some people, depending on where you live, may want to divide this up by, in the winter, my average daily usage is this. Therefore, in the winter, I use 10 kilowatts a day and I have 20 kilowatt battery. Therefore, I have 2 days of autonomy. In the summer, I use 5 kilowatts a day and I have a 20 kilowatt battery. Therefore, I have 4 days of autonomy in the summer. But because I'm dealing with no hurricanes, but I am dealing with snowstorms as being my natural disasters, blizzards and that type of stuff, then it's the 2 days that matter to me, not the 4. Does that make sense? So I would not care about the 4. And that's a very good point, James. I don't know how long ago you sent that, but let me just put that up on the screen here. So what James is pointing out here is that this one, I believe, yes. James is saying that only 10% of gas stations in the United States have backup power at the pumps. And this I can attest to. There was, until some areas started getting power a few blocks from my house, most of my neighbors had ran out of gas. And they were not able to keep their generators running all the time. They would start them up in the morning and they would run their freezers and refrigerators for an hour or two, and then they'd turn them off for fear of running out of gas. On the first day or two, oh, they were all running them like there was no tomorrow and wasn't thinking anything of it. They turned them on for 24 hours. In the morning, they would, open up a tank and dump it in there. Once you start getting into the, okay, I've burned through 20 gallons of gas in a couple of days, and you're looking at what does it take to store that much gas? And what does it take to keep that much gas fresh in case of an emergency or whatnot? I will say that my wife was kind of surprised to find that her car gas tank was full every day for about 2 months after the hurricane event, because every chance I got, I had every single empty gas can in the back of my truck, and every chance I got where somebody said there was gas, I went and filled back up. It didn't happen for about 6 days before we were able to get any real gas. But after that, I was full practically every day. Should autonomy be based on normal or emergency use? Autonomy can be based on either or. It depends on what you want to risk. For me, I base it on worst case scenario. One of the horrific hurricanes hits. Where do I want to be, and how do I want to be set to handle it? It's hard to say what would fit your risk, what fits your risk, and what makes you would feel comfortable about. For me, it's knowing that I'm not going to get sick from the water that I'm drinking, and B, I'm going to be able to eat, rather that's peanut butter and crackers, or whether that's steak on the barbecue grill, that at least I'm going to be able to eat and keep myself sustained. A lot of people call me an apocalypse nut, or what do they call them, prepper. And to a certain extent, I guess I could say that I am a little bit of a prepper. I do believe that being prepared is wise. Do I think the world is coming to the end and the zombie apocalypse is coming? No, but if it does happen, I'll be ready. If you're headed this way when it does happen, because I'm ready and because I'll have power, make sure you bring some ammunition, because you're not welcome in without being able to defend yourself. All right. Um, anyway, moving on. How much battery capacity do I actually count? I count all but about 5%, simply because I'm going to use all my battery in a disaster like that and don't care how much damage it does to the battery, even if I believe that it's not going to damage the battery. I also can confirm that I know that 95% of my battery is actually there. This is one of those things where I said, turn off your power and see how much of your system really works. Just because that stupid state of charge says you got 20% in your battery, a lot of you will be surprised to find out that at 10% you have no battery, or 18%. When I ran my very first test, it was 18%. At 18%, my system shut down and my battery shut off at the BMS, not at the inverter level, because of low charge. So checking and testing that you have an accurate way to measure your batteries, that is where I would suggest the Smart Shunt from Victron. They are the best battery monitor that I've been able to find, and the most accurate. And I find that a lot of times, even when I doubt them, they end up being right, especially over those cheap ones that are in all the batteries. Um, More batteries or a generator? Well, that is a really hard question. More batteries always is good, but they're expensive, and a generator is always a good emergency backup. So I would say a cheap generator with a way to something like a charge verter. And if you're not familiar with a charge verter, I'll put a link in the description below after we're finished recording here for a charge verter. But it's basically taking that dirty power, converting it into batteries, and charging your batteries regardless of it. I buy those cheap generators, except for the food truck. If I was going to do a disaster type generator, you buy the super cheap ones with the loud, noisy thing, because I'm going to turn them on full blast and pull 80% of their power and suck it in as fast as I can and put it into the batteries. But in order to do that, you have to protect your electrical equipment, your computers, your sensitive devices and stuff like that. That's what a charge verter does. It takes that dirty power, it converts it into battery, and charges the battery directly, and allows you to continue operating with your inverter and your pure sine wave safely. But it allows you to take advantage of that. And I'm going to charge the battery as fast as I can and shut it off, because that's the most efficient way to do it. Is autonomy a different in RVs versus a home? Only in size, and only in the case that in an RV you always have the option, or hopefully you have the option, of hooking up and getting the hell out of Dodge. In a home, you don't have that option, and the disaster is your disaster. If it's a flood, you're stuck in the flood. If it's a hurricane, you're stuck there. If you're in an RV, there's a good chance that you have the option of hooking up and driving off and getting out of the problem. But I've also seen it the other way around. So is the autonomy calculations different? Is the necessity different? No. Is the options, some of the alternative options? Yes. Um, and what autonomy do I personally aim for? I don't even remember who sent this question, but my personal preference is to have 5 days, although I have not been able to accomplish more than three at so far. Right now, the solar shed is sitting, if I only run what's part of the shed and the coffee trailer, it's sitting at 5 days. But it's very minimalistic. I'm not really doing a whole lot at this point, other than some construction and running a few refrigerators and stuff. But I would think that I saw the biggest difference when I went from about 1.2 days to 2.8 days of autonomy. It was a huge difference. I went from charging every other day to basically not charging for sometimes months at an end. It's amazing what that little barrier of the 2.5, I would say probably 2.5 days of autonomy, is where the sweet spot is. Above that, it's more of a luxury. Below that, it's more of a pain in the butt. Um, but that said, that's where I personally would aim for is 5. Practical is probably more 3 would be a good goal, is to have 3 days of autonomy. Um, just kind of recap here of the idea behind this is to teach us all to understand and to learn from experience that just because you have a bunch of solar panels doesn't mean you actually have the ability to operate endlessly over, over in a real disaster. Um, and no matter how many you have, you may not have enough to actually get fully operational. Good news is that they do help, and they help you extend it, but they're not a substitute for batteries. Um, anyway, I think I've blabbered on enough about this subject matter, and this went on a whole lot longer than I expected to. But hopefully, I've explained my thoughts and ideas on autonomy to you guys, and hopefully, we've all learned something from it. And I appreciate James pointing out that gas stations only 10% have power. I did not know that. And that 72 hours, the phone companies do, they lose their autonomy and they shut down. So we all have our limits. We all have the amount of risk that we're willing to accept. If you're looking for more ways to learn about solar systems and to understand what they are, I do have a DIY solar class that I'm launching at the end of the year. The memberships, the sign up fee for it is at half price for the founding members between now. It'll launch on January 1st. I encourage you to go over to down in the description and find the link to that. I will include it is mattmansolar.com. And you go there, it's mattmansolar.com/classes or DIY solar classes. Anyway, mattmansolar.com, and I'll include a link down below. I didn't do QR codes today, but I will end this on a video that has a QR code for the DIY solar class, and it'll kind of explain more about it if you're interested in that. It's got all of the content that you need from beginning to end, all arranged in one place. But it doesn't change the fact that I'm always going to be producing new videos. It just puts it all in order for you and organizes it and gives you the opportunity to get firsthand help on a solar system and talk to some other people that are just like you and looking to learn about solar systems. And I'm having a great time building it and using all of the content that I had, plus a bunch of new content to put into the solar class. So hopefully we'll see some of you there. And I think I can, I don't know how I do this. Let's just see if I can, there it is. Here it goes, guys. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate it. Thanks to all my members. Thanks to all my subscribers. And this week we are celebrating having so many members. Let me see how many we are at. Wow, I don't even know. Let's see. Where is my, there it is, window. Let's do, we are sitting at right now 17,466 subscribers. That is just so fantastic. I really, really appreciate you guys for doing that. Let's see if I can set the, wow. I don't have anything set up this week, do I? I'm going to find that though. We need to set off some fireworks. Where are they? Where are the fireworks? Really? I don't see them anywhere. Oh, there they are. Fireworks gotta work. Here we go. Ready, go. There we go. 17,544. Thank you for being part of it. Thank you for watching. Thank you for attending tonight. And I will play the DIY solar class piece for you. It kind of gives you an idea of what it is if you're interested. Hope to see some of you there. Thanks for watching this week, and we'll see you next week. You guys Winter solstice is in 6 more days, and then we start gaining time again and get more solar time every day. I'm looking forward to that too. Have a good night. Thanks for coming. It won't switch. Ah, there we go.
Over the last couple of months, I have shown you a lot of different solar builds. We have done everything from a $180 solar shed to the solar shed version 2 that had the solar 12-volt solar system built into it, to an RV 48-volt system, a DIY battery, or even my wife's coffee trailer setup. The one thing I keep hearing over and over from you is that I want to do this myself, but I don't know where to start. So I built something for you. I'm calling it simply the DIY Solar Class. It's a self-paced, approximately 12-week step-by-step course that shows you how you can design, wire, and power your own solar system the right way, the safe way, and without wasting a whole bunch of money the first time around buying things that you don't need. Learn from my experience. Each week, the curriculum focuses on one of the components in a solar system, either that be panels, batteries, inverters, wiring, real builds, real life situations, real designs, with all the details, with diagrams and videos so that you can follow along. I built this class because I remember when I first started how confusing my first solar system was. I didn't understand amps, I didn't understand volts, I didn't understand wire sizes. I understood electricity a bit, but fuse ratings confused me. Different types of fuses confused me. There was so much information overload that putting it all together with a random selection of videos out on the internet was very difficult. So this class is intended to put it all together. It takes everything that I've learned from dozens and dozens of builds and all the mistakes that I've made along the way, and there have been a bunch of them, and turns it into one complete roadmap that you can follow step by step and get the information you need. So if you've watched my videos or wanted to build your own system, this is how we can do it together. Let me give you an idea of what is included in this class. So you're going to get a step-by-step video lessons for each part of the solar system. Printable diagrams and parts list. Either you can follow them exactly, or we can work together to modify them to meet just your specific needs. We'll do a live Q&A session every other week just for the class so that everyone gets all of their questions answered. I've also included a one-on-one call to go over and to review your designs or just talk about what your solar system is involved and make sure that you're comfortable and have all the questions you need in that one-on-one setting. Not only that, but you're going to get lifetime access to all this content as I update it as we go along, so that you can go at your own pace, come back at any time to refresh, and when I add new content, you already got it. You can always come back and pick up where you left off or rewatch the entire course anytime you want. If you've been waiting to build your own solar system, if you're looking for the perfect gift for someone who wants to build a solar system, if you want to put solar in your shed or on your RV or take your house off grid, this class is for you. This is why I made it, to give you that one-on-one help to make sure that you do it right and you do it safely. Founding members right now, between now and the December 31st, get 50% off the class. Starting January 1st, the class goes to full price. So right now, if you sign up, you get it for half price. That's a lifetime membership. You'll never be taken out of the class. You can join today at mattmansolar.com/class or click the links below. Either way, I'm going to keep teaching on YouTube. I enjoy it way too much. But if you want to go deeper, if you want to know exactly what you need for your system, this class is for you. If this sounds like what you've been looking for, Head over to mattmansolar.com/class or just scan the QR code on the screen to grab your spot. Founding members get 50% off through December 31st, and we kick things off on New Year's Day. I'd really love to see some familiar names from the comments inside and help you design, build, and update your system.